No one understood the Japanese mafia boss until the shy waitress suddenly replied in perfect Japanese, leaving the entire restaurant stunned. Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now? The restaurant fell into its familiar hush when Yamamoto entered through the private entrance. It wasn't the kind of silence born from respect. It was the instinctive quiet of prey, sensing a predator. Waiters moved with practice efficiency, eyes downcast, as the man who controlled half the city's underground walked toward his usual corner booth. At 33, Daichi had perfected the art of isolation. His tailored black suit fit like a second skin. The white shirt beneath opened just enough to reveal the gold chain that caught the dim lighting. Dark hair, slicked back with precision, a carefully maintained stubble framing a jawline that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled people. Obsidian depths that revealed nothing while seeing everything. 2 bodyguards flanked him at a respectful distance, hands never straying far from their concealed weapons. The mafia boss settled into the leather booth, and the restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. "Mizwai," he said, without looking up from his phone. His voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. The senior waiter froze. Paolo had worked at Vincenzo's for 15 years, had served politicians and celebrities, but he'd never learned to understand the boss's native tongue. No one had. It was part of the barrier Daichi maintained. Speak only Japanese, and the world kept its distance. Sir, I apologize, I don't." Paolo stammered, sweat beating on his forehead. Daichi's eyes lifted slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He repeated himself, each syllable precise and unforgiving. "Mizuakit kurasai." The senior waiter looked desperately toward the kitchen, panic rising. Everyone knew what happened when you disappointed the Yamamoto family. People didn't just lose jobs. They disappeared from the city entirely, relocated by forces they'd rather not question. "Right away, sir. I'll figure out." "He's asking for water." The voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Every head in the vicinity turned toward the young woman who had spoken. She stood near the service station, a red apron over her simple black shirt, light brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Emily Carter, 24 years old, had worked at Vincenzo's for 8 months. She kept to herself, arrived early, left late, and had never not once inserted herself into situations involving the restaurant's most dangerous patron. Until now, Daichi's gaze locked onto her with the intensity of a spotlight. For the first time in years, someone had surprised him. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or suspicion. "Nihongo?" he asked, his tone sharp with challenge. "Do you understand Japanese?" Emily met his stare without flinching, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the order pad. "Hai sukoshi han samasamasu." "Yes, I can speak a little." The restaurant might as well have stopped breathing entirely. Paolo looked between them with mounting horror, certain he was about to witness something terrible. The bodyguards tensed, reading their boss's body language for any sign of threat, but Dai simply leaned back against the leather, studying this unexpected translator with unnerving focus. "Anaton Ryori osum shimaska." "What do you recommend?" "The chef prepared fresh uni tonight," Emily replied in Japanese. Her accent American, but her grammar surprisingly solid. "If you prefer something less adventurous, the Wagyu is exceptional. Cooked medium rare with truffle butter. A ghost of something. Not quite a smile, but close." touched the corner of Daichi's mouth. "Your pronunciation needs work." "I apologize," she said, switching to English, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I'm self-taught." "Why?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications Emily didn't fully understand. She hesitated, aware that every person in the vicinity was listening, despite their pretense of busy work. "My best friend in college was Japanese," she finally said, her voice softer. "Before she passed away, she made me promise I'd learn. Said it would open doors I didn't know existed." Something shifted in Daichi's expression, so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. But Emily saw it. A crack in the carefully constructed armor. Grief recognized grief. "The Wagyu," he said in Japanese. "Medium rare. And your name, Emily Carter." Emily Carter, who speaks the language of the dead for friendship. He switched to English, his accent thick but controlled. "Interesting." Before she could respond, Paolo practically yanked her away from the table, his face pale. "What were you thinking? You never approach Mr. Yamamoto without being summoned. Do you understand what kind of man he is?" "I was helping." Emily protested quietly as they moved toward the kitchen. Helping, Paolo hissed. "He's not some businessman who needs assistance with the menu. The Yamamoto family controls everything from the docks to downtown. When he makes a phone call, problems disappear permanently. And you just made yourself visible to him." Emily glanced back at the corner booth. Daichi was on his phone speaking rapid Japanese to someone who apparently wasn't pleased with whatever he was saying. His bodyguards stood like statues, and the other diners gave his section a wide berth. "He just wanted water," she said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "He wanted isolation," Paolo corrected, "and you just shattered it." The rest of Emily's shift passed in a blur of anxious glances and whispered warnings from co-workers. The Wagyu was prepared with obsessive care. No one wanted to disappoint the man whose reputation alone kept the city's other crime families at bay. When Emily delivered the plate, Daichi was reading something on his tablet, his expression unreadable. "Duo," she said quietly, placing the dish before him. "Please enjoy. Sit." Emily blinked. I'm working, sir." "Sit," he repeated, gesturing to the seat across from him. It wasn't a request. She slid into the booth, hyper-aware of the bodyguard's attention, of Paolo's horrified expression from across the room, of the way her pulse raced with something that might have been fear, or might have been something far more dangerous. "Tell me," Dai said, cutting into the perfectly cooked meat. "Why does a waitress in an upscale restaurant need to speak Japanese, I told you, my friend? Was that the only reason his eyes pinned her in place? Or did you think it would be useful in a city where my family's influence touches everything I didn't know who you were until tonight?" Emily said honestly. "I've seen you here before, but no one talks about the regulars. Not to me, anyway." Daichi studied her with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire on reading people's lies. Whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Your friend, what was her name?" "Yuki Tanaka. How did she die?" The question should have been intrusive, offensive even, but something in Daichi's tone suggested he understood loss intimately. Emily found herself answering. "Car accident 3 years ago. She was visiting family in Kyoto." Her voice caught slightly. "She was supposed to come back and teach me to make real okonomiyaki. Instead, I learned from YouTube videos and language apps. That's why your grammar is better than your accent," Daichi observed. "You learned from text, not conversation. There aren't many people to practice with in my neighborhood." "No," he agreed, something dark flickering in his expression. there wouldn't be. They sat in strange silence for a moment, the restaurant's ambient noise seeming distant. Emily knew she should excuse herself, return to her tables, stop staring at this man who radiated danger like heat from a flame. But she couldn't quite make herself move. "Do you know what people call me in this city?" Daichi asked suddenly. "No, sir. Akuma the demon." He took a sip of water, watching her reaction. "Because I built my family's empire on fear and elimination. When rivals challenge our territory, they simply cease to exist. No trials, no police reports, just gone." Emily's throat went dry, but she held his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should be afraid of me, Emily Carter. Everyone else is." He leaned forward slightly. "But you're sitting here translating my words like we're discussing the weather. Either you're very brave or very foolish." "Maybe I'm just tired of being invisible," she said, before she could stop herself. Daichi's eyes widened fractionally, the closest thing to surprise she'd seen from him. Then, impossibly, he almost smiled. Not the polite business smile he'd seen him give other patrons, but something genuine, something that transformed his entire face from intimidating to devastatingly attractive. "Invisible," he repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I understand that very well." A phone buzzed, one of the bodyguards answering in hushed, urgent Japanese. Emily caught fragments. "Problem warehouse needs your decision." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Daichi's expression hardened back into the unreadable mask. "I have business," he said, standing abruptly. He placed several hundred bills on the table, far more than the meal cost. "Keep the change." And Emily, she stood as well, suddenly aware of how small she was, compared to his imposing frame. "Yes. Next time I come here, I want you to serve me. Only you. Tell Paolo this isn't a request." Then he was gone, flanked by his guards, leaving Emily standing alone at the booth, with her heart racing and the entire restaurant staff staring at her with expressions ranging from envy to outright terror. Paolo appeared at her elbow, his face ashen. "What did he say to you? He wants me as his regular server." "Mother of God," Paolo whispered. "Emily, do you understand what you've just become? Everyone who gets close to that man either becomes part of his world or gets destroyed by it. There's no middle ground." Emily looked down at the money on the table, then toward the private entrance, where Daichi had disappeared into the night. She thought about Yuki, about promises made to the dead, about the way those obsidian eyes had softened for just a moment when she'd mentioned learning Japanese for friendship. "Maybe," she said quietly, "I don't want middle ground anymore." 3 days passed before Daichi returned. 3 days of Emily jumping every time the private entrance opened, of the other staff treating her with newfound weariness, of Paolo pulling her aside to remind her that Mr. Yamamoto's interest had ended careers and lives before. She told herself she wasn't disappointed when he didn't show. Told herself it was relief, not anticipation, that made her pulse quicken each time a black car pulled up outside. She was lying. On Thursday evening, during the dinner rush, he arrived without fanfare. Same corner booth, same 2 bodyguards maintaining their vigilant positions. But this time, when Emily approached with water and menus, Daichi was already watching her. "Kabanwa." "Emily-son," he greeted in Japanese. "Good evening, Kabanwa." "Yamamoto-an," she replied, her pronunciation slightly better from 3 nights of practicing alone in her apartment. "You've been working on your accent. You said it needed improvement." Something flickered in his expression. Approval, perhaps. Sit with me while I order. Sir, I have other tables. Sit. Not harsh, but absolute. Emily slid into the seat across from him, acutely aware of the other diner's curious glances of Paolo's disapproving frown from the host stand. This was breaking every rule, crossing boundaries that existed for good reasons. I had someone look into you, Daichi said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than invasion of privacy. Emily Rose Carter, 4 years old, Columbia graduate with a degree in international relations. Could have worked for any number of consulting firms or government agencies. Instead, you serve food to people who barely see you. Emily's stomach dropped. You investigated me. I investigate everyone who enters my sphere. It's how I stay alive. He studied her reaction calmly. Your transcripts were impressive. 3.9. GPA. Fluent in 3 languages, though your Japanese is admittedly rough. So why the red apron? Emily. What are you hiding from? She should have felt violated, angry. Should have stood up and walked away. But instead she found herself answering honestly. Student loans, my mother's medical bills. The reality that an international relations degree doesn't pay what everyone promises. She met his gaze steadily. Not all of us have family empires to fall back on. No. Daichi agreed, something dark crossing his features. Though family empires come with their own prices, blood prices. Before Emily could respond, one of the bodyguards approached, leaning down to murmur urgently in Japanese. She caught enough to understand. Takahashi family territory, dispute tonight. Daichi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He responded in rapid Japanese too quick for Emily to follow, then turned back to her as if the interruption hadn't happened. I need to leave, but first answer me something honestly. He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming. When you looked me up after our first meeting, and don't pretend you didn't, what did you find? Emily hesitated, then decided truth was safer than lies with a man who built empires on reading deception. That the Yamamoto family controls most of the city's underground operations. That your father was assassinated 5 years ago, and you took over at 28. The 3 rival families tried to challenge your leadership, and all 3. She swallowed hard. Ceased operations within 6 months. Ceased operations, Daichi repeated, with a mirthless smile. Gentle phrasing for what actually happened. Continue. That you're considered untouchable, dangerous, that people cross the street when they see your cars. She paused. That you've never been arrested, never even questioned because either you're extremely careful or extremely connected. Both, he said simply. And knowing this, you're still sitting here. You haven't given me much choice. There's always a choice, Emily. You could quit, disappear into the city. I wouldn't follow. Wouldn't you? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to examine. Daichi's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Emily glimpsed something beneath the cold exterior. Loneliness, perhaps the isolation of a man who'd built walls so high that even language itself became a barrier. Your mother, he said, changing subjects abruptly. What's wrong with her stage 3 breast cancer in remission now? But the treatments. Emily looked away. Insurance covered most of it, but most isn't everything. And your father left when I was 6. We haven't spoken since. Daichi nodded, as if this confirmed something. So you understand what it means to be alone, even when surrounded by people. To build walls for survival. Is that what speaking only Japanese is? A wall? It was, he admitted quietly. Until you. The vulnerability in those 2 words struck Emily like a physical force. This man, this terrifying, powerful, dangerous man, had just revealed a crack in his armor, and somehow she'd become the wedge that created it. Yamamoto. The bodyguard interrupted again, more insistently. "Hai wakarimashita," Daichi snapped, standing abruptly. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly, then showed Emily the screen. "A phone number. This is my private line. Not many people have it." His eyes locked onto hers. "If anyone bothers you, threatens you, even looks at you wrong because of our conversations, you call this number immediately. Understood? I don't need protection." "Yes, you do. You just don't realize it yet." He grabbed his jacket, preparing to leave. "The moment you spoke Japanese to me, you became visible in a world that notices everything. And visibility. Emily Carter can be very dangerous." He left without ordering food, his guards flanking him as they disappeared into the night. Emily sat alone at the booth, staring at the phone number on her own screen, where she'd hastily saved it, her hands trembling slightly. Paolo appeared instantly. What did he say? That I'm visible now. Christ. Paolo ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Emily, I need you to understand something. Whatever fascination Yamamoto has with you, it won't end well. His ex-girlfriend, the one before he took over the family. She tried to leave him, tried to start a normal life. What happened to her? No one knows. She just vanished one night. Some say he let her go with enough money to disappear. Others say he trailed off meaningfully. The point is, once you're in his world, extraction isn't simple." Emily's phone buzzed. An unknown number, but she knew instinctively who it was. "Thank you for humoring a lonely man's company. The restaurant will receive compensation for your lost tables tonight. Also, your mother's remaining medical bills have been paid in full. Consider it payment for your translation services." Die. Her breath caught. She pulled up her mother's hospital account on her phone with shaking fingers. 0 balance. 47,000 just erased. "Oh God," she whispered. Paolo leaned over, saw the message, and went pale. "Emily, no. You need to return that money right now." "How? It's already processed. Then you need to stay away from him. This is how it starts. First the gifts, then the obligations. Then you're so deep in his world, you can't see daylight anymore." But Emily was staring at the 0 balance, thinking about her mother's relief about the crushing weight that had just lifted from her shoulders, and thinking about a man who spoke only Japanese to keep the world at arm's length, who'd seen something in a random waitress worth investigating, worth protecting, worth investing 47,000 in. "I should return it," she said. But the words felt hollow. "You can't return it." He knew that when he sent it. Paolo's voice was heavy with resignation. "You're already caught, Emily. The question is whether you'll fight it or accept it." That night, lying awake in her small apartment, Emily stared at Daichi's number in her contacts. She should delete it. Should quit Vincenzo's move to a different neighborhood, pretend the last week hadn't happened. Instead, she opened her photos, finding pictures of Yuki from college. Her friend laughing at some joke Emily couldn't remember, making silly faces wearing the kimono her grandmother had sent from Japan. "You said learning Japanese would open doors," Emily whispered to the image. "You didn't mention they'd be doors to a world I shouldn't enter." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from that same unknown number. "I'm assuming you're awake. Probably overthinking everything. Don't return the money. Your mother's health is not a negotiation point. I paid a debt. You gave me something I haven't had in years. Conversation without performance. Sleep well. Emily, son. I'll see you soon. Before she could second-guess herself, Emily typed back, "Thank you. But this doesn't mean I'm okay with what you do." The response came almost immediately. "I wouldn't respect you if you were." Good night, Emily. She fell asleep with her phone clutched in her hand, dreaming of obsidian eyes and barriers made of language that somehow impossibly she'd managed to cross. 3 blocks away, in a private office overlooking the city, Daichi Yamamoto stood by floor-to-ceiling windows, his own phone in hand. Behind him, his second-in-command, Kenji, waited patiently. "The Takahashi situation is resolved," Kenji said in Japanese. "They've agreed to our terms. Good. However, sir, I feel obligated to point out that your interest in the waitress is being noticed. The other families will see her as leverage. Then they'll learn what happens when they threaten what's mine." "Is she yours?" Sir Daichi turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "She will be." The next 2 weeks passed in a surreal rhythm. Daichi came to Vincenzo's 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Always the same booth, always requesting Emily, and always without fail, he'd gesture for her to sit with him while he ate. They talked about everything and nothing. He'd ask about her day, her studies, her mother's recovery. She'd practiced Japanese, stumbling over phrases while he corrected her pronunciation with infinite patience. They discussed literature politics, the way the city changed after dark. They never discussed his business, never mentioned the emir built on fear or the methods that kept rivals at bay. It was an unspoken agreement. In that corner booth, surrounded by candlelight and soft music, they existed in a bubble separate from reality. Emily told herself it was harmless, just conversations with an interesting, if dangerous, regular customer. But she couldn't quite explain why her heart raced every time he walked through that entrance, or why she'd started learning kanji in her spare time, or why she found herself dressing more carefully on nights she knew he'd appear. "You're playing with fire," her co-worker Sandra warned one evening, watching Daichi's car pull up. "That man is gorgeous. Sure, but he's also got blood on his hands. Metaphorically, at least." "We're just talking," Emily protested. "Honey, men like that don't just talk to women like you. Whatever he wants, it's not conversation practice." But Sandra was wrong, Emily thought. Daichi did want conversation. He craved it like oxygen. Genuine connection with someone who saw him as a man rather than a title. Someone who didn't flinch when he moved, didn't weigh every word for hidden threats. Someone who'd learned his language not for advantage, but for love of a friend who'd died too young. Tonight, he arrived later than usual, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. When Emily approached, she noticed a small cut on his jaw, barely visible beneath his stubble. "What happened?" she asked in Japanese, sitting across from him, without waiting for invitation. Something she'd grown comfortable doing. "Business disagreement," he replied shortly. "Nothing that concerns you. You're bleeding. It's nothing." Emily stood and returned with a first aid kit from the kitchen, ignoring his protests. She dampened a cotton pad with antiseptic and reached across the table. "This will sting," she warned. The moment her fingers touched his jaw, the air between them changed. Daichi went absolutely still, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. She dabbed gently at the cut, hyper-aware of the warmth of his skin, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his pulse jumped beneath her fingertips. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Almost done," she murmured, applying a small bandage. His hand came up, catching her wrist before she could pull away. Not roughly, but firmly enough to keep her there. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? Treating a small cut. This us, these conversations. His thumb brushed against her pulse point, feeling the rapid beat. I've built my entire adult life on distance and control. And you with your terrible accent and your honest eyes are destroying both. Emily should have pulled away, should have reminded them both that this was her workplace, that he was a customer, that the things people whispered about him were probably true. Should have done anything except lean slightly closer and whisper, "Maybe I want to. You don't know what you're saying, don't I?" She met his gaze steadily, seeing the conflict there. Want warring with something that might have been protectiveness. I'm not naive, Daichi. I know what you are, what you do. It was the first time she'd used his given name. The intimacy of it hung between them like a confession. If you know, he said softly, then you should run far and fast. Is that what you want? What I want, Daichi said, his eyes dropping to her lips. And what's best for you are entirely different things. A phone buzzed. His, not the bodyguard's. He glanced at it, and whatever he saw made his expression harden into something frightening. I have to go. Another business disagreement. Something like that. He stood, but didn't release her wrist immediately. Emily, I need you to promise me something. What if anyone approaches you asking about me, anyone at all, you tell them nothing and call me immediately? Don't be brave. Don't try to handle it yourself. Just call. Fear flickered in her chest. What's happening, War? He said simply. The Takahashi family is challenging our territory agreements. It's going to get ugly before it gets better. His grip tightened fractionally. I can protect you, but only if you let me. I don't need. Yes, you do. He finally released her wrist, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never witnessed before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. The moment word spreads that Daichi Yamamoto sits with the same woman every night that he's paid her debts and speaks to her in his native tongue, you become a target. Rivals will see you as my weakness. Are you? Emily asked before she could stop herself. Is that what I am? A weakness? Daichi reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek so gently she barely felt it. You're the first person in 5 years who's made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of a title. So yes, Emily. Carter, you're the most dangerous weakness I've ever had. Then he was gone, flanked by his guards, leaving Emily standing alone with her heart pounding and her cheek burning where he'd touched her. Paolo materialized at her elbow. Whatever that was, it needs to stop now. It's not just anything. I've worked here for 15 years, Emily. I've seen what happens when civilians get caught in territory disputes. The Takahashi family won't hesitate to use you against him if they think it'll give them an advantage. How do you know about the Takahashi family? Paolo sighed heavily. Because this restaurant sits right on the boundary line between their territory and Yamamoto's. We've managed to stay neutral, but that neutrality means we see and hear things. And what I'm hearing is that tensions are escalating rapidly. Emily touched her cheek, where Daichi's fingers had been remembering the way he'd looked at her, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. I can't just stop talking to him, Paolo. Then God help you both. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment listening to city sounds through thin walls, thinking about obsidian eyes and the weight of isolation. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Are you awake? I can't sleep, she replied. Neither can I. Thoughts too loud. Want to share them? A long pause, then. I'm thinking about how impossible this is. About all the reasons I should stay away from you. About how none of those reasons seem to matter when you look at me like I'm something other than a monster. Emily's breath caught. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Are you a monster? I've done things that would make you run screaming if you knew the details. Built an empire on fear and elimination. Made people disappear when they threatened what's mine. So yes, Emily, by most definitions, I am exactly that. And what am I in your world?" Another long pause. When his response came, it made her heart stop. "You're the woman who's making me question whether I want to be a monster anymore." Before Emily could respond, another message arrived. "Tomorrow night, after your shift ends, there's something I need to show you, something you deserve to know before this goes any further. Will you come with me?" Every logical bone in her body screamed no. This was the moment to draw the line to protect herself from a world she didn't understand and had no business entering. Emily typed back, "Yes, then I'll wait for you. And Emily, wear comfortable shoes. Where we're going, you'll need to be able to run if necessary." She stared at that last message, her pulse racing with equal parts fear and anticipation. Somewhere in the city, a war was brewing between criminal families. And somehow impossibly, she'd become important enough to a man called the Demon that he was willing to show her the truth. Emily pulled up Yuki's photo again, studying her friend's familiar smile. "You said learning Japanese would open doors," she whispered to the image. "You didn't say I'd find someone waiting on the other side who'd make me forget why I was afraid of the dark." Her phone buzzed one last time. "Sleep well, Emily-san. Tomorrow everything changes." "See?" She clutched the phone to her chest, knowing sleep was impossible now, because tomorrow night she'd step fully into Daichi Yamamoto's world, and some doors once opened could never be closed again. Emily's shift ended at 11. By 11:15, she stood outside Vincenzo's back entrance, her comfortable sneakers feeling inadequate for whatever lay ahead. The alley was dark except for a single streetlight that flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on brick walls. A sleek black car pulled up silently. Not the usual sedan with bodyguards, but something lower, faster. The driver's window descended, revealing Daichi behind the wheel. Alone. "You came," he said, and she heard genuine surprise in his voice. "You asked?" Emily approached the passenger side, hesitating with her hand on the door. "Where are your guards?" "Where we're going, they'd only complicate things." He leaned across to open her door. "Trust me, Emily, just for tonight. Trust." Such a simple word for such an enormous ask. Emily slid into the car, noting the expensive leather interior, the way the engine purred rather than growled. This wasn't a car for intimidation. It was built for speed and discretion. "You should know," Daichi said, as he pulled into traffic, "that what I'm about to show you could put you in danger. Real danger, not the theoretical kind. Last chance to change your mind. Where are we going to see the truth of who I am? What I built, what I've destroyed to maintain control." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Most people in my world see fragments. The power, the money, the fear, but they don't understand the foundation. It's all built on the blood price, as I once called it." They drove in silence through increasingly empty streets, the city's glittering downtown giving way to industrial warehouses and abandoned factories. This was the part of the city, tourists never saw, where broken street lights created pools of darkness and graffiti told stories of territories and power. Daichi pulled into an unmarked building's underground garage, using a key card to access levels that clearly weren't on any official registry. When they finally stopped, they were 4 floors beneath street level in a pristine parking area that held only 3 other vehicles. All expensive, all nondescript. "This is the heart of the Yamamoto Empire," Daichi said quietly. "Our headquarters, where decisions are made that affect thousands of lives." He turned to face her fully. "Once you see inside, you can't unsee it. You'll know things that make you complicit, at least legally." "Then why bring me here? Because I'm tired of the distance." His voice was raw with honesty. "Tired of pretending that what's happening between us is simple or safe. You deserve to make an informed choice about whether you want me knowing exactly what comes with it." Emily took a deep breath. "Show me." The elevator required a thumbprint and a code. As they ascended, Daichi explained in quiet Japanese, perhaps seeking comfort in the language that had once been his shield. "My father built this organization from nothing. Came to America with $3 and a willingness to do whatever necessary to survive. By the time I was born, we controlled the docks, the import routes, half the city's underground economy." His expression darkened. "But control requires constant maintenance, challenges from rivals, betrayals from within authorities that need managing. It's not like the movies, Emily. There's no honor in it. No code that makes it noble. It's just survival wrapped in expensive suits." The elevator opened into a corridor that looked more like a corporate office than criminal headquarters. Tasteful artwork, recessed lighting doors with names rather than numbers. But Emily felt the weight of it, the understanding that beneath the civilized veneer lay something far more dangerous. Daichi led her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A detailed map covered one wall, marked with colors and symbols that meant nothing to Emily, but clearly represented territories and power structures. "See the red zones?" Daichi pointed to several sections. "Takahashi family territory. The blue is ours. The yellow zones are disputed areas where we're currently in conflict." His finger traced the boundary lines. "Vincenzo sits right here, on the edge between blue and red. Neutral ground that both sides use for meetings befools, that need to appear legitimate. That's why you eat there partially, also because the food is exceptional and the owner understands the value of discretion." He turned to face her. "But the real reason I started going there, 2 years ago, was because it was the one place I could exist without the weight of expectation. Where I could speak Japanese and know no one would understand, where I could be invisible." "Until I wasn't," Emily said softly. "Until you weren't," he agreed. "And now the Takahashi family knows about you. They've had people watching the restaurant documenting our meetings. They're trying to decide if you're valuable enough to use as leverage." Fear spiked through Emily's chest. "What does that mean?" Daichi's expression became something frightening, cold, calculated, utterly ruthless. "It means they're considering whether kidnapping or threatening you would force me to concede territory. Whether the demon of the Yamamoto family has finally found something worth surrendering for." "And have you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Daichi moved closer, close enough that Emily could see the flecks of grey in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as if restraining himself from reaching for her. "Yes," he said simply. "Which is why I need you to understand exactly what that means. What I'll do to protect you." He gestured toward a laptop on the conference table. This contains files on every major operation we've conducted in the last 5 years. Every territory dispute, every rival we've eliminated, every method we've used to maintain control. I want you to read them. All of them. Daichi, no. His voice was firm. If you're going to be part of my life, you need to know what that life entails. The things I've ordered. The people who've disappeared because I made a phone call. The families destroyed because they challenged our power. He opened the laptop, pulling up file after file. This is who I am when I'm not sitting in that restaurant booth pretending to be normal. This is the monster Emily. Look at it. For the next 2 hours, Emily read. Reports detailing territory acquisitions that left rival organizations in ruins. Documentation of negotiations that were clearly threats. Photographs of abandoned warehouses where confrontations had taken place. No bodies, no blood. But the implications were clear. Records of payments to officials, judges, police officers. The entire corrupt infrastructure that kept the Yamamoto Empire functioning. With each file, her understanding grew. This wasn't some romanticized underworld where honor and loyalty reigned. This was systematic, calculated control maintained through fear and elimination. And Daichi sat at the center of it all, making decisions that destroyed lives with the same casual efficiency that others might use to approve budget reports. When she finally closed the laptop, her hands were shaking. Daichi stood by the windows, his back to her, tension evident in every line of his body. "Now you know," he said quietly. "I won't blame you if you walk out that door and never speak to me again. I'll ensure your safety. Make certain no one from either family ever approaches you. You can go back to being invisible Emily, back to a life that makes sense." Emily stood her legs unsteady. She walked to where he stood, stopping just behind him. In the window's reflection, she could see his face, the careful blankness that hid whatever he was feeling. "Turn around," she said. He did slowly, and she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of rivals or violence or law enforcement. Fear of her judgment. Fear of seeing disgust replace whatever warmth she'd shown him. "I should be terrified of you," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should be. I should run as far and fast as I can." "Yes, but all I can think about," she continued, stepping closer, "is that you've shown me the absolute worst parts of yourself, given me every reason to hate you, and you're standing here like you're waiting for execution. Because I am Daichi admitted you're the first person in years who's seen me as human. Losing you would be worse than any rival's bullet." Emily reached up her hand, cupping his jaw, where she'd placed the bandage days before. "I'm not naive enough to think I can change you. Not arrogant enough to believe love conquers all. Love." The word came out, rough, disbelieving. "But I am brave enough," she continued, ignoring the interruption, "to admit that I don't want to walk away, even knowing what you are, what you've done." Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone. "Maybe that makes me as damaged as you are, Emily." She kissed him. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was months of tension and weeks of careful distance, finally breaking through walls they'd both built. Daichi went rigid with surprise for half a heartbeat. Then his control shattered. He pulled her against him with barely restrained intensity, one hand tangling in her hair, the other gripping her waist as if she might disappear. The kiss tasted like danger and desperation and something that might have been salvation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daichi rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he whispered in Japanese. "Completely." She agreed in the same language. "I can't promise you safety. Can't guarantee this ends well." "I know. The Takahashi family will come for you. Others too, once they realize how important you've become. Then teach me how to survive in your world." Daichi pulled back enough to meet her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or second thoughts. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do this my way. Security protocols, protected locations, guards when necessary." His expression hardened with determination. "And you learn to defend yourself. If they come for you, I need to know you can buy time until I arrive." Agreed. A phone buzzed his on the conference table. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor shifted into something cold and lethal. "What is it?" Emily asked. "The Takahashi family just made their move. They've taken one of our shipping routes, claimed it as retaliation for territory we acquired last month. He was already moving, pulling up files, making calls in rapid Japanese. This is the beginning. They're testing our response time, our willingness to fight back. What are you going to do?" Daichi looked at her, and she saw the man behind the mask, the one who'd killed and ordered deaths and built an empire on elimination. "I'm going to remind them why people call me Akuma. Why the Yamamoto family has held power for 30 years. He pulled her close one more time, kissing her with an intensity that felt like goodbye. "But first, I'm getting you somewhere safe, somewhere they can't touch you while I handle this. I don't want to hide. This isn't negotiable, Emily. The warehouse confrontations that happen when territories are challenged, they're not something you can witness and remain innocent." His voice was absolute. "You wanted to be part of my world. This is me protecting what's mine. Let me." She wanted to argue, to insist she was strong enough to handle whatever came. But the look in his eyes stopped her. Not control or dominance, but genuine fear. Fear that she'd be caught in crossfire, that the violence he'd shielded her from would touch her anyway. "Okay," she whispered, "but you come back to me." "Always," Daichi promised. "I've spent 5 years being a monster because it was easier than being human. You don't get to give me back my humanity and then disappear." Within 20 minutes, Emily found herself in a luxury apartment she'd never seen before. One of several safe houses the Yamamoto family maintained throughout the city. 2 female guards were stationed outside, both armed and clearly capable. Daichi had given her a phone with only one number programmed in his direct line. "I'll end this quickly," he said at the door. 3 days, maybe 4. Then we can figure out what this life looks like together. Be careful." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Careful isn't how wars are won, Emily. They're won by being more ruthless than your opponent, more willing to go further faster. He touched her cheek gently, the contrast between the touch and his words jarring. "Sleep. I'll call when it's over." Then he was gone, and Emily was alone in a beautiful apartment that felt like a gilded cage. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the last few hours. The files she'd read, the kiss that had changed everything, the casual way Daichi had spoken about warehouse confrontations and territory disputes. She'd just committed to a relationship with a man who ordered deaths with the same ease others might order coffee. A man who'd shown her the absolute worst of himself and waited for judgment. A man who looked at her like she was both his salvation and his greatest weakness. Her phone buzzed, a text from the only number programmed in. Thank you for not running for seeing the monster and staying anyway. Whatever happens in the next few days, remember this. You gave me something worth fighting for, beyond power. That changes everything. Stay safe, Emily. Sunday. Emily clutched the phone, tears streaming down her face. Not from fear or regret, but from the overwhelming understanding that she'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She'd chosen love in a world built on violence, chosen humanity in the empire of demons, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like the rightest wrong decision she'd ever made. 3 days passed in the luxury apartment. 3 days of guards outside her door, meals delivered by people who spoke in hushed tones, news reports that mentioned gang violence in the industrial district without providing details. Emily tried calling Daichi twice, but both times it went straight to voicemail. She left no messages. What could she say? Hope the territory war is going well. On the morning of the 4th day, her phone finally rang. Emily. His voice was rough, exhausted, but alive. It's over. Are you okay? Physically unharmed. The Takahashi family has agreed to our terms. They're withdrawing from the disputed territories and accepting our original boundary agreements. A pause. It wasn't pleasant. Emily closed her eyes, not wanting to imagine what wasn't pleasant meant in his world. When can I see you tonight? I'll pick you up at 7. There's something I need to show you. The aftermath. You need to see what choosing me really means. Daichi. No, Emily. You've seen the files and the maps. Now you need to see the reality. Then if you still want this, we move forward together. His voice softened. I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm trying to give you an honest foundation. No illusions. At 7 Hozuru precisely, the apartment door opened, but the man who walked in wasn't the polished, controlled Daichi she'd known. His suit was rumpled, dark circles under his eyes, a fresh bruise along his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. You look terrible, Emily said, crossing to him immediately. War isn't kind to anyone, even the victors. But he pulled her into his arms, holding her with an intensity that spoke of relief and exhaustion. God, I missed you. 3 days felt like months. What happened the version for civilians? We had aggressive negotiations that resulted in mutually beneficial territory agreements. He pulled back his eyes, searching her face. The truth. I had to make examples, show them why challenging the Yamamoto family has consequences that extend beyond simple business losses. Did people? She couldn't finish the question. No one died. Not this time. Daichi's expression was grim. But several of their key operatives are no longer in position to cause problems. The Takahashi family understands now that touching you, threatening you, or even thinking about you too hard will result in consequences they're not prepared to face. He led her down to the car this time, with one bodyguard following at a discreet distance. They drove through the city as dusk settled, the lights beginning to twinkle across the skyline. But they weren't heading downtown. Instead, Dai drove toward the waterfront, to an area of renovated warehouses that had been transformed into upscale lofts and galleries. This is where it started, he said, parking in front of a building that looked like any other. My father's first legitimate business, an import company. Everything we built came from here. They took an elevator to the top floor, which opened into a massive loft space, but it wasn't decorated like a home. The walls held photographs, hundreds of them. Pictures of a young Dai with a stern-looking older man who must have been his father. Images of the Yamamoto organization through the decades, and in the center of it all, a large portrait of the elder Yamamoto with dates beneath 1958-2020. He was murdered here, Daichi said quietly, standing before the portrait. 5 years ago, a rival family thought that killing him would destabilize our organization, make us vulnerable. His jaw tightened. They were wrong. It just made me realize that sentiment and mercy are luxuries we can't afford. Emily moved beside him, studying the photograph. The resemblance was clear. Same dark eyes, same strong features. But where Daichi's father looked hardened by years of violence, Daichi's eyes held something different. Pain, perhaps, or weariness. "Is that when you stopped speaking English in public?" she asked softly. "Yes, my father spoke 4 languages fluently, always met people on their terms, made them comfortable, before he destroyed them." Daichi's voice was bitter. "I decided to do the opposite. Make the world come to me. Make them uncomfortable. Off balance. The language barrier became a weapon and a shield. Until me. Until you." He agreed, turning to face her. "Emily, I need you to understand something. When my father died, I inherited more than an organization. I inherited enemies, obligations, blood debts that demand payment. For 5 years, I've managed it all by being colder and more ruthless than anyone else. By convincing myself that connection was weakness, he took her hands, his grip almost painful. But then you walked into that restaurant and spoke Japanese, like Yuki was somehow pushing you toward me. And I realized that I've been slowly destroying myself, becoming exactly what my father never wanted me to be, a monster who's forgotten how to be a man." "So change," Emily said. "Walk away from all of this. It's not that simple. The Yamamoto Empire employs hundreds of people directly, thousands indirectly. Territory we control keeps smaller operations from being consumed by more violent organizations. If I walk away, there's a power vacuum that will be filled by someone far worse." He touched her cheek. "But I can change how I lead, can start prioritizing legitimate businesses, slowly transitioning away from the most dangerous operations. It won't happen overnight, maybe not even in years, but with you beside me, I can remember why it matters." "What are you saying?" Daichi took a deep breath. "I'm saying that you've become more important to me than power. That I'd rather build something with you than continue destroying things alone. That somewhere in these conversations about grammar and pronunciation, I fell completely in love with a waitress who learned Japanese for friendship and stayed despite every reason to run." Emily's breath caught. "You love me." Desperately, terrifyingly, in ways that make me vulnerable for the first time since my father's death. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "So here's what I'm offering. A life with me knowing exactly what that means. Security, but also danger. Wealth, but also association with activities you'll never fully approve of. A man who's trying to be better, but will sometimes fail spectacularly. And what do you want from me?" "Everything," Daichi said, simply. "Your mornings and your nights. Your terrible accent and your intelligent arguments. Your presence at dinners where I need to remember that I'm human. Your voice speaking Japanese when the weight of English becomes too heavy." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, opening it, to reveal a ring, simple, elegant, with a single diamond. "I want you to marry me, Emily Carter, to be my partner in everything, including redemption." Emily stared at the ring, her mind racing. They'd known each other for weeks, not years. This was insane, impulsive, completely illogical. Every rational thought screamed that this was too fast, too dangerous, too complicated. "Yes," she whispered. Daichi's eyes widened. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll learn to navigate your world. Yes, I'll be there when you need reminding that you're more than the title people call you." She took the ring from the box, sliding it onto her own finger, because waiting felt impossible. "And yes, I love you too, even though you're a criminal and possibly insane and definitely bad for my life expectancy." He kissed her then, and it felt different from the first time. That had been desperation and tension finally breaking. This was promise and commitment, and the understanding that they were choosing each other despite every logical argument against it. When they finally broke apart, Daichi rested his forehead against hers. "My second in command is going to have an aneurysm. The family advisors will question my judgment. Other organizations will see you as leverage. So we make them understand that I'm not leverage. I'm family." Emily's voice was firm. "You teach me how to survive in this world, and I'll teach you how to live in it without losing yourself. Deal?" He smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. Fair warning. Yamamoto family weddings are elaborate affairs. Hundreds of guests, traditional ceremonies, at least 3 different outfit changes. I'll wear the red apron over the wedding kimono. Really confuse everyone. Daichi laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so purely joyful that Emily felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this dangerous, powerful, isolated man, was laughing because of something she'd said. "I love you," he said again, like he was testing the words, learning their shape. "I've destroyed families and built an empire and survived assassination attempts, but nothing has terrified me more than those 3 words." "Good," Emily said, kissing him softly. "Fear means you're taking this seriously. And if we're going to survive each other, we'll need to take everything very seriously indeed." They stayed in that loft until late in the night, talking about logistics and futures and how to navigate a relationship that broke every conventional rule. Daichi explained the security measures that would become part of Emily's daily life, the bodyguards who would shadow her the safe routes she'd need to learn the protocols for emergencies. Emily talked about her mother, about introducing Daichi properly, about finishing her degree while navigating this new reality. They made plans and contingencies, built frameworks for a life that seemed impossible but felt increasingly real. "Your mother Daichi said at one point, she'll need to know the truth about me, about what marrying me means for her safety too. She's tougher than she looks. Survived cancer and my father leaving and raising me alone. She'll understand." Emily hesitated. "But she'll also worry. Then we make sure she has no reason to. Upgraded security emergency contacts, clear communication protocols." His expression was serious. "Anyone who marries into the Yamamoto family becomes my responsibility. That includes mothers who raised brave daughters." As they finally prepared to leave, Emily looked at the portrait of Daichi's father one more time. "Do you think he'd approve of me?" Daichi considered the question carefully. He'd say you're a complication, a vulnerability that could be exploited. He pulled her close. "But he'd also recognize that you're the first person who's made me want to be more than what this life demands. And deep down, beneath all the violence and control, he wanted better for me. So yes, Emily, son, I think he'd approve." They drove back through the city, and Emily noticed the way Daichi's hand sought hers at every stoplight, like he needed constant confirmation that she was real and hadn't changed her mind. When they reached her apartment building, the regular one, not the safe house, he walked her to the door, despite the bodyguard's obvious presence. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start the real work, integrating you into my world, meeting the people who matter, establishing you as non-negotiable in my life. I have a shift at Venenzo's tomorrow," Emily pointed out. "Not anymore. I'm buying the restaurant. You'll own a share. Legitimate income and a business interest that doesn't raise questions." At her shocked expression, he smiled. "I told you, Emily, everything changes now, including the fiction that you're just a waitress I happen to talk to. You can't just buy an entire restaurant because I work there. Watch me." He kissed her gently. "I've spent 5 years acquiring power. Now I finally have something worth using it for." Emily watched him drive away, the ring heavy and real on her finger. She looked at it under the streetlight, watching the diamond catch and refract the glow. Somewhere in the city, the Yamamoto Empire continued its operations. Somewhere, people whispered about the demon who'd finally found a weakness. But standing there with the taste of his kiss still on her lips and the promise of an impossible future ahead, Emily couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. She pulled out her phone, looking at Yuki's photo one more time. "You told me learning Japanese would open doors," she whispered. "You were right, but I never imagined the door would lead here. I hope you'd be happy for me, even though this is completely insane." The photo smiled back, frozen in time and memory. And Emily chose to believe that wherever Yuki was, she was laughing at the absurdity of it all. At the waitress who'd learned a language for friendship and somehow found love in the darkness of the criminal underworld. 6 months later, Emily stood in a private dressing room at one of the city's most exclusive hotels, staring at herself in the mirror. The wedding kimono was breathtaking. Pure white silk with delicate embroidery of cherry blossoms and Crane's traditional symbols of fidelity and longevity. Her hair had been styled in an elaborate updo adorned with ornamental pins that had belonged to Daichi's grandmother. "You look beautiful," her mother said, adjusting the collar with gentle hands. Patricia Carter had taken the news of her daughter's engagement with surprising grace. Perhaps surviving cancer had given her perspective on which battles were worth fighting. Or perhaps she'd seen the way Daichi looked at Emily and recognized genuine love beneath the dangerous exterior. "I'm marrying into the mob," Emily said, not for the first time. "You know that's insane, right, sweetheart? I married your father, who abandoned us for a cocktail waitress in Nevada. Compared to that, a man who actually shows up and pays my medical bills is a significant upgrade." Patricia smiled. "Besides, I've seen you happier in these 6 months than in your entire adult life. That has to count for something." The door opened to admit Kenji Dai's second-in-command, who'd become an unexpected ally during Emily's integration into the Yamamoto organization. "The ceremony begins in 10 minutes. Are you ready as I'll ever be to promise forever to a man who still speaks Japanese when he's stressed?" "He speaks Japanese when he's happy now, too," Kenji observed. "You've done something remarkable, Emily. Son, the boss we have now versus the man 6 months ago. They're different people." And it was true. The transition hadn't been smooth or simple. There had been challenges from within the organization. Advisors who questioned Daichi's judgment, allies who saw Emily as a distraction. But slowly, methodically, Daichi had made it clear that she was non-negotiable, that anyone who threatened her would face consequences that ended careers and territories. More importantly, he'd begun the painful work of transitioning the Yamamoto Empire toward legitimate operations investments in real estate and technology partnerships with above-board companies, slowly distancing from the most dangerous aspects of their history. It would take years, maybe decades, but the foundation was being built. Emily had her own battles, learning to navigate a world where every conversation carried hidden meanings, where alliances shifted like sand, where her words could have unintended consequences. The bodyguards who shadowed her everywhere, the protocols for public appearances, the understanding that privacy was now a luxury rather than a default. But there were victories too. Vincenzo's was thriving under new management with Emily as co-owner and Paolo running day-to-day operations. She'd finished her degree mostly online, but finished. She'd learned to recognize threats before they materialized, to read the subtle tensions in Daichi's posture when business went wrong. Most importantly, she'd learned that loving someone didn't mean fixing them. Daichi would always carry the weight of his choices, the knowledge of what he'd done to build and maintain power. But he carried it differently now with someone beside him who saw the man beneath the title. The traditional ceremony was held in a private garden on the hotel's grounds. As Emily walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, she saw the assembled crowd, a fascinating mix of legitimate business leaders and carefully disguised criminal operatives, all united in their connection to the Yamamoto family. And at the altar, wearing traditional formal wear that made him look like he'd stepped out of history, stood Daichi. When their eyes met, everything else faded. The crowd, the complexity, the dangerous reality they navigated daily. None of it mattered in that moment. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Japanese, honoring both their backgrounds. When it came time for vows, Dai spoke first. "Emily-san," he said in Japanese, his voice carrying across the garden. "You walked into my life, speaking the language of my isolation, and turned it into our bridge. You saw the worst parts of me and chose to stay. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope for redemption." He switched to English. "I can't promise you a simple life, can't guarantee safety or normally. But I can promise that every day I'll choose you over power. That your happiness will matter more than territory or control. That the man you're marrying today will spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of your faith." Emily had prepared vows, rehearsed them carefully, but standing there looking into those obsidian eyes that held such unexpected tenderness, she abandoned the script. "Dai," she said, her voice strong. "I learned Japanese for a friend who died too young, but I stayed to speak it with a man who taught me that love isn't about finding perfection. It's about choosing someone despite their complications. You're dangerous and impossible and completely unsuited for the normal life I thought I wanted." She smiled, tears streaming down her face, "and I wouldn't change a single thing. You're mine, and I'm yours, Ools, and the rest of the world can deal with that, however they need to." When they kissed his husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause from people who'd probably never imagined seeing Daichi Yamamoto show genuine emotion. But he did, holding Emily like she was the only real thing in a world of carefully constructed illusions. The reception was elaborate, exactly as Daichi had warned. Multiple courses, speeches in various languages, traditional performances interspersed with modern music. Emily changed outfits 3 times, from the white kimono to a red formal gown to a sleek black dress for the final dance. "Surviving," Daichi murmured as they danced. The party continuing around them. "Thriving," Emily corrected. "Your uncle's speech in Japanese was hilarious, by the way. I hope not everyone understood the part about your teenage years. You weren't supposed to understand that part either." "Too bad. I now have blackmail material for future arguments. Daichi laughed, pulling her closer. I love you, Emily Yamamoto. Thank you for gambling on an impossible future. Emily. Carter. Yamamoto, she corrected. I'm keeping part of my name. Someone has to maintain a connection to the world outside. Fair enough. He spun her gently. Our flight leaves in 3 hours. 2 weeks in Japan, showing you where I came from, introducing you to family who couldn't make the journey. Will they approve? They'll love you. My grandmother specifically requested I bring the woman who tamed the demon. Her words, not mine. As the night drew to a close and they finally escaped to their suite, Emily kicked off the expensive heels with relief. Daichi loosened his tie, and for a moment they simply existed together in comfortable silence. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. That night you spoke Japanese in the restaurant. If you could go back, would you stay silent? Emily considered the question seriously. The last 6 months had been chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos that had reshaped her entire existence. She'd gained wealth and security, but lost anonymity and simplicity. She'd found love, but accepted the constant awareness that danger lurked at the edges of their lives. No, she said, finally. Because that night I stopped being invisible, and you stopped being alone. Everything else we can figure out, together. Daichi crossed to her, cupping her face with hands that had ordered devastation, but touched her with infinite gentleness. I was convinced I'd spend my entire life isolated by choice and necessity. That connection was weakness I couldn't afford. And now I understand that isolation was the weakness. Connection. You are what make me stronger. He kissed her softly. Thank you for seeing past the monster to the man who desperately needed to be found. They stayed in Japan for 2 weeks, and Emily watched Daichi transform in his homeland. He laughed more easily, spoke Japanese without the undercurrent of isolation, introduced her to temples and traditions that had shaped his childhood before violence reshaped everything else. His grandmother. A tiny woman with eyes exactly like Daichi's took Emily's hands and spoke in rapid Japanese that Emily struggled to follow. Daichi translated his expression soft. She says that my father would have approved that you have the strength to walk in darkness without being consumed by it. That our children will bridge 2 worlds, honor and redemption. He paused. She also says your accent is improving but still needs work. Your grandmother is delightfully savage. Emily said, making the old woman laugh at whatever she read in Emily's expression. They returned to the city transformed. Not fundamentally different people, but versions of themselves who'd chosen complexity over simplicity, danger over safety, love over logic. The Yamamoto Empire continued its slow transformation, with Emily gradually taking on roles that surprised everyone, including herself. She became the face for their legitimate businesses, the bridge between the underground and above-ground operations. She learned to negotiate with politicians and criminal operatives with equal facility. She became fluent in the language of power, not just Japanese, but the universal dialect of those who shaped cities from shadows. But she also insisted on maintaining connections to her old life. Weekly dinners with her mother, regular visits to Vincenzo's, where she'd sometimes help during rushes just to remember what normal felt like. Friendships with people who knew nothing about the Yamamoto Empire and saw her simply as Emily. You're building something remarkable, Kenji observed one afternoon, watching Emily mediate a dispute between 2 of their legitimate business partners. A life that exists in multiple worlds simultaneously. It's exhausting, Emily admitted, but it's mine, ours. 1 year after their wedding, Emily and Daichi stood in that same corner booth at Vincenzo's, the place where everything had started. Paolo had retired, and the restaurant was thriving under new management. But they'd kept the booth exactly as it was, a shrine to impossible beginnings. "Do you remember what you ordered that first night?" Emily asked, speaking Japanese, as naturally as breathing now. "Wagyu medium rare, with truffle butter recommended by a waitress who'd learned my language for friendship and stayed for something neither of us expected. I was so terrified of you. You should have been. I was dangerous." Daichi paused, then corrected himself. "I am dangerous, but differently now, more carefully. Because of me, because of us, because you gave me something worth being careful for." He took her hand, the matching wedding bands catching the light. "I used to think power meant control and isolation. Now I understand it means having someone to share the weight with, someone who will call you out when you forget you're human." Emily smiled, thinking about the journey from that first shocked conversation to this moment of comfortable understanding. Yuki would have loved this story. The drama, the impossibility, the ridiculous romance of it all. "Tell me about her again," Daichi requested. "About the woman who unknowingly brought us together." So Emily did, speaking in English and Japanese, interchangeably painting a picture of her friend who'd made her promise to learn a language that would open doors. And as she talked, she realized that those doors hadn't just opened. They'd led her through darkness into unexpected light. Led her to a man called a demon, who'd forgotten how to be human, until a waitress reminded him that language wasn't just about words. It was about connection, bridge building, the willingness to be vulnerable enough to let someone translate your heart. "Thank you," Daichi said, when she finished, his voice thick with emotion, "for honoring her memory by building this life with me, for proving that learning Japanese for a friend could lead to loving a monster and finding the man underneath." "You're not a monster," Emily said firmly. "You're a man who did terrible things to survive a terrible world. But you're changing. We're changing it together." They sat in that booth for hours, speaking in 2 languages that had become one, planning futures and remembering pasts existing in the complicated, beautiful space between darkness and light that they'd claimed as their own. And somewhere in the universe, Emily chose to believe that Yuki was watching, laughing at the absurdity and perfection of it all. At the promise kept, the language learned, the doors opened, and the love found in the most impossible of places. The language of silence had become the language of connection, and Emily Yamamoto, once invisible waitress, now equal partner to a man reshaping an empire, finally understood what Yuki had meant all along. Learning Japanese wouldn't just open doors. It would teach her that the most powerful translations happen not between languages, but between hearts, willing to bridge the impossible distance between isolation and love. The end.